My name is Verena Halliday. I'm 66 years old, and for most of my adult life, I was the chief financial officer of a real estate investment firm I co-founded in my 30s. Numbers came easy to me. People didn't. But I did everything for my family, especially my only son, Reed. The morning of his wedding, I woke up in the guest suite of my own home, though it hadn't felt like mine for a long time. My head ached, my body felt oddly cold, and something was off. When I reached up to smooth my hair back, I felt nothing. My fingers skimmed raw skin. I rushed to the mirror and froze. My head was bald, completely, smooth and bare, like it had been shaved while I slept. My heart thundered. For a moment, I thought it was a medical emergency, a side effect, a stroke, but there was no dizziness, no confusion, just shame. Then I saw the note, folded neatly and propped on the vanity table where I usually kept my makeup, cream-colored paper, gold-inked edges, Tasha's handwriting impossibly elegant. Perfect look for you, pathetic old woman. You finally look your age. Just in time for the wedding. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection, at the hollow outline of a woman who'd spent her life building legacy, only to be stripped of dignity by her future daughter-in-law. That very day, $100 million was scheduled to transfer from my estate holdings, an inheritance gift for the newlyweds. It was supposed to be a celebration of love, of family, of continuity. But as I sat there, bald and humiliated, something in me cracked, and during the wedding toast, I stood up. And that's when their smiles disappeared. Before I tell you what I said, I need you to understand how I got here. Not just the wedding, not just the note, but the 1,000 tiny paper cuts that led to that final wound. If any part of this story feels familiar to you, if you've ever been quietly erased by the people you love, I hope you stay. Sometimes, the softest voice in the room holds the loudest truth. And if you know someone who needs reminding that their worth isn't measured by their role in someone else's story, maybe share this with them. That morning, after the note, I didn't run down the hall screaming. I didn't call Reed. I didn't demand answers. That would have given Tasha exactly what she wanted, a scene. No, I sat quietly and let the silence wrap around me like armor. I remembered the last time I had cried in front of Tasha. It was 6 months prior at a Sunday brunch she hosted. The eggs were overcooked, the napkins didn't match, and she made a joke about my dated taste in everything, including child rearing. I laughed politely, but something in her tone stung. Reed had smiled awkwardly and said, "She doesn't mean it, Mom. Tasha's just got strong opinions." Strong opinions. That's what they called it. I had been shrinking for months, skipping dinners, sending gifts instead of showing up. I convinced myself it was age, that I was simply tired, that the distance was natural, but now I knew. I hadn't been stepping back. I'd been pushed, and the final shove came in the form of a razor to my scalp. I moved like a ghost through the rest of the morning, showered, dressed. I found a soft scarf and wrapped it around my head, but it slipped, and I hated the way it made me feel hidden, like I was ashamed. I wasn't. Not anymore. The shame wasn't mine. Tasha had arrived late to her own wedding preparations, sweeping into the house with a wave of perfume and bridesmaids. She didn't look at me once. Reed was nowhere to be found. I asked the housekeeper, Alana, if she'd seen him, but she just shook her head and said softly, "He's at the venue already." That meant I was alone in the house with the bride. For a moment, I considered confronting her, asking her why, demanding an explanation. But instead, I looked at the reflection in the hallway mirror. The scarf had shifted again. I pulled it off. There. That was me, stripped bare. I opened my closet. Navy blue, floor length. The dress I had planned to wear was elegant, understated, something I chose months ago when I still believed this wedding meant union, not strategy. Now, it would be armor, As I zipped it up, I thought of the $100 million, a legacy fund I had set aside after the IPO of one of our longest-held properties. Reed had always admired that building, said he loved how it overlooked the river, how it had stood the test of time. I thought he meant it. That money had been meant as a surprise, a gesture of faith in his future. It had taken me years to grow it, carefully building it across trusts and yields. The plan was to announce it at the wedding, quietly, through our family lawyer. A letter, a handshake, a gift. Instead, it had become leverage. I stepped out of the room with bare shoulders, bald head, and a navy dress that felt heavier than steel. Alana looked up when she saw me. She didn't gasp. She didn't ask. She simply said, "You look like yourself." And I nodded. Because for the first time in years, I did. Tomorrow, I'll tell you what happened at the toast. The ride to the venue was quiet. Alana drove while I sat in the back, watching the trees blur past the window. My scarf lay folded in my lap. I didn't want it. I didn't want to hide. Not anymore. But what I did want, what I still hoped for even then, was my son. Reed was born on a Sunday morning in early spring. I remember because the light coming through the hospital window was golden, like honey, and I had whispered to myself, this is what it means to begin again. I was 33. I had just signed the paperwork for my first office lease, and I held Reed like he was the only contract that mattered. Over the years, I missed school plays and recitals. I worked late, traveled often. I justified it by telling myself I was building something for him, something stable, something future-proof. But no amount of spreadsheets or strategy could have prepared me for how he slowly drifted into someone else's orbit. The first sign was small. He stopped calling me Mom and started using Ma. Tasha said it was cuter, more casual. Then she took over holiday planning, first Thanksgiving, then Christmas. I offered to host. She'd already booked something. I cooked Reed's favorite dish. She told him he should eat lighter. "You're not 20 anymore," she'd say with a smirk. And he'd laugh, awkwardly, every time. It wasn't overt at first, just subtle, an erosion of space, of presence. I remember the day I realized I needed to make an appointment to see my son. It was 3 months after their engagement. I had texted to ask if we could have coffee, just the two of us. Tasha replied instead, "Reed's schedule is packed this week, but I'll let him know you reached out." I stared at the message for 10 minutes, then deleted it. That was when I stopped asking. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, swirling wine in a crystal glass, and listened to the echo of my own breath. The house had never felt that empty, not even after my husband passed away, because then I still had Reed, or I thought I did. 2 weeks later, Tasha redecorated the living room. She replaced my mother's painting above the fireplace with an abstract canvas in harsh reds and grays. She had it framed before she even told me. When I asked what happened to the old painting, she blinked and said, "Oh, it was depressing. This has better energy." Reed didn't object. He just said, "She's got taste, Mom. You wouldn't get it." That sentence, it stayed. You wouldn't get it. As if the years I spent balancing risk portfolios, negotiating million-dollar deals, and raising him through loss and transition had turned to dust the moment she decided I was outdated. At the rehearsal dinner, I wore a soft lavender blouse and pearl earrings. Tasha arrived in white silk and announced, "No one else wear white tomorrow, please. It's the bride's color." She looked at me when she said it. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. But that was the first time I left the table early. Reed never came upstairs that night. I assumed he stayed with friends, or maybe at the venue. Now I wonder if he was simply avoiding me, whether it was guilt or indifference or convenience. That morning, after I found the note and saw my reflection, a strange thought passed through me. What if I don't go? What if I disappear and let them have their day untouched by me? But that thought vanished as quickly as it came, because no matter how much they tried to erase me, I was still his mother, and I would not be written out like a character in someone else's script. At the venue, Reed stood at the altar looking handsome. Too handsome, really. He had my father's jawline, Robert's dark hair, and a nervous twitch in his right hand he never could hide. I watched him from the last row of the ceremony as I arrived. He scanned the room briefly, then looked away. He didn't search for me. Tasha was radiant, the kind of radiant that cost money and came with a team of stylists. She walked past me without a glance. Her perfume trailed behind like smoke. The bridesmaids giggled. The groomsmen tapped their phones. And I stood there, invisible. In that moment, I didn't feel pain. I felt clarity. Like something had finally settled. Like whatever string I'd been clinging to had snapped, and instead of falling, I had found ground under my feet. After the ceremony, Reed approached briefly. He kissed my cheek quick and dry and whispered, "Glad you made it, Ma. Tasha was worried you'd pull something dramatic." I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't mine anymore, not the way he used to be. And yet I smiled. "Don't worry," I said. "I wouldn't want to ruin your big day." He nodded. "I knew you'd understand." But he was wrong. I didn't understand. I remembered everything. And now I had no intention of staying quiet. 3 years ago, I began preparing a gift that I thought would change my son's life. The real estate market was ripe for an exit. One of our flagship buildings, a 40-story tower near the marina, was being targeted for acquisition by an international firm. I held majority shares. The deal closed quietly, cleanly, and profitably. After taxes and reinvestments, $100 million sat in a legacy fund under my name. At the time, I told no one. Not even Gary, my attorney of over 20 years, knew the exact numbers until I finalized the distribution plans. I wasn't just building wealth. I was building permanence. I had this vision of Reed, years from now, running his own foundation or business, starting his family, secure in every sense of the word. I wasn't naive. I knew money came with complications, but I also knew what it meant to raise a child alone in a world that often treated single mothers like temporary workers in their own households. I wanted him protected, and this was the best way I knew how. The plan was simple. The money would transfer into a dual-name trust account overseen by Gary on the evening after the wedding. The conditions were standard. No debt, no criminal records, and the marriage had to be legally filed and documented within 48 hours of the ceremony. It was, by every measure, a generous gesture, and perhaps a desperate one. A week before the wedding, I spoke to Dr. Erin Locke for the first time in nearly a year. She'd been my therapist during the years after Robert died. We had a good rapport. She was never intrusive, never patronizing, just a soft presence with sharp questions. That day, on the phone, she asked, "Why now?" I told her I wanted to give Reed something before I felt too old to matter. She didn't speak for a while. Then she said, "Is that how you feel now? That you're running out of time to be seen?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. I wasn't sure if the money was love or leverage. I only knew I needed it to mean something. On the morning of the wedding, before I saw the note, before I knew what Tasha had done, I had already sent Gary an email confirming the timeline. The subject line was simple: "It's time." I had even drafted a short message to be read on my behalf at the reception, a quiet announcement. No theatrics. I didn't want applause. I just wanted acknowledgement. But that version of me, the one who still believed this day was about family, she vanished the moment I touched my bare scalp in the mirror. Now, sitting in a quiet corner of the reception hall, I watched Reed laugh with his groomsmen. His smile was wide, practiced. He raised a glass, made a joke. People clapped. I studied him like I was meeting him for the first time. Was this the boy who used to make me pancakes every Mother's Day, who used to hide love notes in my briefcase before board meetings, who once told his classmates I was the smartest woman in the world? Or had I imagined all of that? I took out my phone. The draft message to Gary was still open. I typed a new one. Hold everything. I need to see you in person first. No transfers until we meet. I'm not sure anymore. I hit send. Then I turned off my phone. I didn't want to hear the buzz. I didn't want anyone to reach me. I just wanted to sit in the stillness of that decision and let it settle. Across the room, Tasha floated through the crowd in her gown, radiant and hollow. She waved to people like a queen. When our eyes met, her smile faltered for the briefest second, and I saw it. Just a flicker. She knew, or at least she suspected. Gary called later that evening, but I didn't answer. I waited until the next morning. We met at a small cafe across from the courthouse. He was already seated, folder in hand. I have the documents, he said quietly. You're allowed to cancel everything, but you should know. Once I submit the withdrawal, it's permanent. No going back. I sipped my tea and nodded. That's the point. He slid a new set of papers toward me. You want to update the will, too? Yes, I said, and I want the new one notarized today. Gary looked at me for a long time. You waited a long time to do this, he said. I smiled, not out of joy, but from something colder, clearer. I waited too long. He nodded, and I signed. Back at home, I folded the original trust documents, the ones I never gave Reed, and placed them in a box in my closet. I didn't burn them, I didn't shred them. I wanted them to exist, as proof, as memory. Because someday, if he ever asked me why, I would have an answer. You don't reward silence with loyalty. You don't fund cruelty with inheritance. And you don't let someone make you small in a house you built. The gift of a lifetime had been revoked, and I didn't owe anyone an apology. Later that afternoon, after I left the cafe, I returned to the wedding venue. Not because I had to, but because I wasn't done watching. There was something about moving through the halls of that place, seeing the floral arches, the velvet chairs, the laughter from the bridal suite. I wanted to see it all. I wanted to see what they looked like when they thought they'd won. The staff didn't question me. I moved quietly, like a shadow with purpose. I wasn't dressed for the occasion anymore. Just a soft sweater, slacks, no makeup. I kept my head uncovered, though. No scarf, no hat. Let them see. Let someone ask. No one did. I wandered into the east wing, past the reception prep room, until I came upon a long hallway lined with closed doors. It was quieter here. The music and chatter from the main event were muffled by thick walls. One door was cracked slightly. A soft yellow glow seeped through. I heard the hum of a voice, low, anxious. At first I assumed it was a staff member, but then I heard the name. Mason. I froze. Reed's voice, just above a whisper. I moved closer, breath held. The door opened to a lounge area with a leather couch, some shelves, and a minibar. Reed stood with his back to the door, phone to his ear. He was pacing. I told you, just give it one more day. After that, it's done. I'm doing exactly what we said. His tone was tight, stressed, not the confident voice I'd heard during the ceremony. A pause. No, she doesn't suspect anything. She's obsessed with appearances. This whole thing, wedding, reception, the money, she thinks it's a storybook ending. Another pause. Then, yeah, once the money clears, I'll tell her. I'll spin it, make her think it's mutual. She'll walk away with half, I get my freedom. We start fresh, just like we said. I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself. Reed's voice dropped again, tender this time. I want to be with you, Mason. I always have. I could hear the reply, tinny, muffled through the phone. I couldn't make out the words, but whatever Mason said made Reed chuckle. You're terrible, he said softly. But yeah, I like that. He turned slightly, and I stepped back, flattening against the wall, heart pounding. Not from shock, not from the fact that my son was in love with someone else. That wasn't what shattered me. It was the calculation, the way he spoke of Tasha, not with affection or even conflict, but as an obstacle, a pawn, a means to a financial end. It mirrored the way she spoke about him. They weren't in love, they were in business, and the merger was only temporary. I stepped away quietly, retracing my path down the hallway, careful not to let the floorboards creak. My palms were damp, my chest tight, but not with sadness, with clarity. I had spent years believing Reed was simply under influence, too passive, too eager to please, too blind to see Tasha's cruelty. But now I understood. He wasn't blind, he was complicit. The wedding wasn't a celebration, it was a transaction, and I had nearly funded the whole thing. I found my way to the courtyard and sat on a wrought iron bench beneath a birch tree. The air was cooler now, the sun lower. A few leaves had started to brown. I watched a dragonfly hover near a nearby fountain, its wings catching the light. I had once believed Reed's happiness was my responsibility, that his choices reflected my success or failure as a mother, that if he was lost, I must have misled him. But sitting there, alone among the stone pavers and trimmed hedges, I let go of that belief. He was no longer a child. He had made choices, conscious ones. I had too. The door was open, the recording from Nina, the canceled wire, and now this phone call. Piece by piece, the portrait was changing. I rose from the bench and returned to the main reception hall. The guests were beginning to settle in for the evening program. Laughter rang out from the far end of the room, clinking glasses, music tuning up. I spotted Tasha across the room, posing for a photo with her bridesmaids. She beamed with that perfect influencer smile, chin tilted, shoulders angled, eyes calculating. Reed returned to her side moments later. She leaned in, whispered something in his ear. He kissed her temple. The photographer snapped a picture. I wondered what that photo would look like 5 years from now, 10, framed above a fireplace, or shredded in a drawer. Then I turned and walked away, unnoticed, but not undone. That evening, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the edge of my teacup over and over, watching the condensation form tiny circles on the wood. I didn't cry. I wrote. A letter to myself. A ledger of truths. He lied, she mocked, I watched, I waited, but no more. The powder room sat at the far end of the hall, gilded in ivory and pearl, one of those spaces designed more for appearances than function. Mirror after mirror, marble counters, fresh orchids in glass vases. I slipped inside during the cocktail hour, not because I needed to, but because I needed air, or something close to silence. That's when I heard them. Two voices, hushed but sharp, coming from behind the closed stall door at the far end. One I recognized immediately, Tasha. The other was softer, more hesitant. Nina Brennan, her best friend since college. Always nearby, always watching. "You're seriously going through with it?" Nina whispered. Tasha let out a low laugh, the kind that carried no warmth. "Of course I am. After 6 months of dating, 2 years of fake smiles, and this circus of a wedding, I'm not walking away empty-handed." Silence. Then Tasha's voice again, laced with smugness. "I give it a year, tops. Enough time to get comfortable, to lock in the image, to secure what I need. Then, irreconcilable differences." Nobody questions it. Nobody blames the bride. My hand gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. Nina hesitated. "And what about his mom? She seemed off today. That dress, the no scarf, the silence. Honestly, she scared me a little." Tasha scoffed. "She should be scared. She's a relic. I mean, did you see her? Looking like some ghost from a Navy museum. I almost laughed out loud." "Still, Nina said, voice lowering. I don't know if this feels right. Of course it doesn't feel right, Tasha snapped, because we're not playing by their little fairy tale rules. But let me remind you, Nina, I'm the one who found the draft transfer confirmation. I'm the one who figured out that the old lady was planning to hand over $100 million, and I'm the one who's about to get half. But come on, $100 million? Nina whispered. Are you sure? I saw the paperwork, trust me. She was going to surprise them after the wedding. And Reed? He's too spineless to stop me. He'll go along with whatever makes him look good. Silence again. Then Tasha added, lower, darker. And if she gets in my way again, I'll do what I should have done months ago. There's a really nice memory care facility in Sonoma. Quiet, private. She won't even notice the transition. The words fell like lead. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, not with tears, but with the clarity of betrayal that slices clean through the chest. A plan, not just to marry and divorce Reed, but to erase me. To remove me like a blemish from a family photo, institutionalize me, strip away my autonomy. I backed away slowly, making sure my shoes didn't squeak against the tile. I reached the hallway, heart pounding. A server passed with champagne flutes. I took one, not to drink, but to have something to hold, something to ground me. Across the hall, the private terrace doors stood slightly ajar. I stepped outside, letting the cold air sting my cheeks. A woman was already there, Nina. She stood by the railing, holding her phone in both hands. When she saw me, she stiffened. We locked eyes. I said nothing. She hesitated. Then slowly, she looked down at her phone, pressed the lock button, slipped it into her clutch. Did you hear everything? She asked, almost a whisper. I nodded once. She looked away. I didn't know she'd go that far. She already has, I said quietly, and so have I. Nina turned toward me. I didn't record it for you. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because I saw your face this morning. Maybe because it's all too much. Her voice cracked. She used to be different, you know? In school, she was smart, competitive, but not cruel. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She pulled out her phone again, held it out to me. I have the file. It's not the whole conversation, but it's enough. You should have it, just in case. I took the phone, tapped the screen, and sent the recording to my email. She watched in silence. When it was done, I handed it back. Thank you, I said. She shook her head. Don't thank me, just be careful. As she turned to go, she paused. Are you going to tell him? Reed? I looked up at the stars just beginning to break through the clouds. I don't think I need to, I said. Sooner or later, people show you who they are. She nodded once, then disappeared into the glow of the reception lights. I stood there a moment longer, letting the wind tangle through my hairless scalp. My head felt oddly free, cold, exposed, but no longer hidden. Inside, music started again. Another toast, another set of laughs from strangers wearing names I once thought belonged to family. I didn't rejoin them. I returned home early that night, the recording tucked safely into my inbox, the scarf folded in my purse, and the note still burning in my mind. It was time to finalize the plan. The morning after the wedding, I rose before the sun. My room was still and quiet, untouched by celebration. A few petals from the bouquet on my bedside table had begun to curl at the edges. Even beauty, it seemed, had limits. I brewed tea the way I always did. Earl Grey, 1 sugar, no milk. I drank it slowly, letting the warmth center me as the sky shifted from charcoal to slate. Outside, the lawn sparkled with dew. The world looked ordinary again. But nothing inside me was the same. The $100 million would not be gifted. Not to them. Not after everything I'd seen, everything I'd heard. I opened my laptop, logged into my secure account, and reviewed the transfer authorization form I had signed 3 weeks ago. The date was today. The clock ticked toward noon when Gary was instructed to begin the distribution to the joint trust in Reed and Tasha's name. I stared at the document, my finger hovering over the button to revoke it. Then I stopped. This wasn't a moment for digital clicks. This required presence, deliberate, physical, accountable. I picked up the phone and called Gary directly. He answered on the second ring. "Verena, is everything all right?" "No," I said softly. "Not even close." He didn't speak. He waited. "I need you to cancel the transfer." A beat. "Permanently?" "Yes, and I need to meet you, today, in person. Bring the revised estate draft." He exhaled into the line, not in surprise, but in understanding. "I'll clear my morning. My office? 1 hour?" 1 hour, I confirmed. Before leaving, I opened the wooden chest at the foot of my bed, the one Robert and I bought on our 10th anniversary. I pulled out the envelope with the original gifting letter, still sealed, still pristine. I slipped it into my purse. As I drove into town, a calm came over me. Not a joyful kind, but the sort of quiet that settles after a storm breaks everything loose. There was nothing left to prove, only things left to protect. Gary greeted me at his office door with 2 coffees and a folder. "Yours is black, no sugar, right?" he asked, handing me the cup. I smiled faintly. "You remember everything." We sat. He opened the folder. I took the liberty of drafting an alternate disbursement plan. "If you'd like, we can assign the full value to philanthropic designations, women's financial foundations, trust shelters for widows, single mothers, just as you mentioned last year." My hands curled around the coffee cup. "Let's do it. And I want the will updated to reflect that. No contingent clauses. Nothing left for Reed. Not anymore." Gary nodded, flipping through documents. "We'll need a notarized signature. I have the notary arriving shortly." I paused. "I also want to record a verbal confirmation." He raised an eyebrow. "For court?" "For myself," I said, "in case anyone ever claims I was coerced or confused or unwell." Gary opened the desk drawer, pulled out a small recording device, and pressed record. He spoke first. "Today is Saturday, 10:02 a.m. I'm sitting with Verena Halliday, who is requesting to revoke a financial transfer in the amount of $100 million US. Verena, please confirm you are making this decision freely and knowingly." I looked into his eyes and spoke without trembling. "Yes, I am fully aware of the amount and implications. I'm choosing to cancel the gift because it no longer serves the values I hold. My decision is made freely, no pressure, no manipulation, just clarity." He nodded and stopped the recording. I signed everything, initials, full name, date. Not once did my pen hesitate. The notary arrived shortly after, confirmed my identity, applied her seal. It was done. Gary leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "This will cause ripples." "I'm counting on it," I said. Before I left, he stood and placed a hand gently on mine. "You did the right thing," he said, "even if it doesn't feel like it yet." "I don't need it to feel good," I replied. "I just need it to be mine." Back in the car, I didn't turn on music. I drove in silence, watching the town pass me by. Storefronts I donated to, the park bench with my name on it, the library where Reed once curled up on rainy afternoons. They all looked the same. But I had changed. When I returned home, I found Alana in the kitchen, slicing fruit for breakfast. She glanced up and gave me a look that didn't pry, but offered a space if I needed it. "I won't be at the brunch," I said, setting my purse down. "I didn't think you would," she replied. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old envelope. Without a word, I placed it into the trash and pressed down until it disappeared beneath coffee grounds and eggshells. Alana said nothing, but her eyes followed the motion. And when I looked at her, she nodded. Then she placed a plate in front of me, warm toast and berries, and sat across the table. We ate together in silence. It was the first meal in weeks that didn't taste like obligation. That afternoon, I called Alana into my room, not because I needed help, not exactly, but because I knew there was no one else I trusted to see me in that state, bareheaded, bruised in spirit, and standing at the threshold of something I couldn't yet name. She entered quietly, wiping her hands on the apron she still wore, even though I had told her years ago she didn't need to. "I'm thinking of attending the reception tonight," I said, staring at my reflection. "As planned." Alana looked at me through the mirror, not at my scalp, not at the hollow behind my eyes, but at all of me. She didn't ask why. She just said, "Do you want to go as yourself, or do you want to show them something else?" "I want to show them what they never bothered to look for," I said. She nodded and stepped toward the armoire. From the back, behind blazers and old charity gala gowns, she pulled out a box wrapped in protective linen. She laid it gently on the bed. I opened it. Inside was a navy blue dress I hadn't worn in over a decade. It had belonged to my mother, fitted, dignified, with long sleeves and a gentle sheen that caught the light like moonlight on still water. "I had it altered," Alana said quietly, "years ago, just in case you ever needed to remember who you were." I touched the fabric, letting it fall over my arm like water. It was heavier than I remembered, or maybe I had grown lighter. "I don't know how to cover my head," I admitted, fingers grazing the nape of my neck. Alana opened a small drawer and pulled out a wig stand. On it sat a silver-streaked shoulder-length wig, soft, elegant, just a little defiant. I blinked. "When did you—" "I've been with this family a long time," she said. "I've seen patterns. I knew something like this might happen, and I knew you'd never ask for help unless the world gave you no choice." I didn't thank her. Some moments are too sacred for small words. Instead, I sat while she gently placed the wig on my head. She adjusted the fit, smoothed the strands, and looked at me in the mirror. "Do you want the truth?" she asked. "Yes." "You don't need this." I nodded. "But tonight I do." She stepped back. "Then let them look. Let them see their reflection in your stillness." As I changed into the dress, Alana laid out the accessories. Nothing ostentatious. A single pair of pearl earrings, my mother's brooch, shaped like a wisteria bloom, and a ring I hadn't worn since Robert's funeral. Simple gold, unsentimental. When I stepped back in front of the mirror, I didn't gasp. I didn't smile. I just stood, still, composed, different. Alana brushed off invisible lint from my shoulder and looked at me as if seeing something take root again. "You don't have to go, you know," she said. "I do," I replied. "Not for them. For me." We sat for a while after that, on the edge of the bed like two women separated by generations, but joined by something older than blood, truth. "I remember when Tasha first moved in," Alana said suddenly. "She asked me if I was part of the furniture or just another antique, then laughed, like it was witty." I looked at her, heart tight. She once told Reed I shouldn't be allowed to answer the door because I look like the help. Her voice was calm, not bitter. And what did he say? Nothing, just looked away. We both stared at the wall, not because it offered answers, but because there was nowhere else to look. "You stayed," I said. Alana smiled, "because I wasn't staying for them." We sat in silence, and in that silence I felt something soft begin to shift, a kind of permission, a kind of mourning. Then I rose, steady and slow. Outside, the car waited. Before leaving, I turned to Alana. "Will you be there?" "No," she said gently. "I've already seen what I need to." I nodded. Then I left. The drive was short, but the silence inside the vehicle stretched long and wide. I watched the trees blur past again like I had that morning, but this time I wasn't retreating. I was arriving. Not as a guest, not as a mother, not as a victim, but as a witness. to everything they thought I couldn't see, and everything I had decided to remember. The venue looked different at night. Under the soft glow of string lights and chandeliers, it pretended to be something magical, an oasis of joy, a promise of beginnings. But I had stopped believing in illusions. I walked through the double doors, unannounced, unnoticed at first, just another figure in navy blue, blending into the background, until I didn't. Heads turned as I passed. Some recognized me, some squinted, uncertain, and some, those who had known me once or thought they did, smiled wide and complimented my appearance. "You look radiant, Verena. Something about you tonight. So elegant." I nodded politely, offering nothing more. No explanation, no excuse. Let them make of me what they wanted. I wasn't here to perform. The navy dress hugged close to my frame, the wig resting gently against my shoulders. Not a disguise, but a veil of intent. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing what they could see, and what they never had. I found a quiet table near the back of the room. From there, I could observe everything. The way Tasha floated from group to group like a polished queen, champagne in hand, laughter rehearsed. The way Reed followed just behind her, smiling when prompted, clinking glasses with men in tailored suits, accepting handshakes from people who said things like, "You married up and don't let this one go." There was no warmth between them, just performance. On the far side of the room, I saw a familiar figure standing alone. Mr. Takashi Ito, a longtime Japanese investor from my early years at the firm. I hadn't known he would be invited. I doubted. Reed even knew who he was. Yet here he stood, observing, thoughtful. He noticed me. From across the room, he gave a small, respectful bow. Subtle. Meant only for me. I returned it. He would be important later. I didn't know how, I just knew. Dinner began shortly after. Courses arrived in slow waves: caviar, scallops, lamb, moose. My plate remained mostly untouched. I had no appetite for the flavors of pretense. The toasts began with the best man, a college friend of Reed's who told stories of late nights and bad decisions and frat house chaos. People laughed. Then came Tasha's maid of honor, a glowing young woman with perfect posture and the kind of nervous affection that made her speech sweet but forgettable. The MC tapped his glass for silence. "And now," he said, smiling toward the center table, "a few words from the groom's mother, the generous, gracious, and undeniably stunning Verena Halliday." There was a pause. All eyes turned to me. Reed looked surprised. Tasha, amused. I rose. My heels echoed against the polished floor as I made my way toward the center. Someone handed me a microphone. I didn't thank them. I didn't need to. I stood beneath the arch of lights, looking out at the crowd, these strangers in silk and cologne, who smiled as if they knew me. And then I spoke. Most of you know me as Reed's mother. Some of you may have worked with me once upon a time, back when buildings were built by hands, not just spreadsheets. A few chuckles. Light, polite. But tonight, I continued, I'm not here to give a speech about my son's childhood. I'm not here to share cute stories or embarrassing moments. I'm here because I almost gave a gift. The room stilled. A very large gift, I said calmly. $100 million, to be exact. Gasps. I had intended to transfer it today, quietly, as a gesture of belief in their future, a foundation of trust and hope and love. I looked directly at Reed, and then I woke up bald. A few people blinked, confused. Laughter tittered uncertainly. I woke up on the morning of this wedding with no hair, and a note from the bride. It read, "Perfect look for you, pathetic old woman." Silence. Cold and hard. I turned my gaze toward Tasha, whose face had gone still. That was the moment I realized something I should have seen long ago. I scanned the room. That I wasn't looking at my son and his bride. I was looking at two people playing roles. Polished, pretty roles, Ones they practiced well, but not with me. Not for me. I took a breath, and today I was ready to give $100 million. The air shifted until I realized. My voice softened, almost tender. I was giving it to strangers. And with that, I placed the microphone on the table, nodded once, and returned to my seat. No music played, no applause followed, only silence, thick and weighted. Their smiles didn't just disappear, they shattered. I hadn't planned to speak. Not like that. Not with such finality. But the moment stood still for me, like the air had parted and made room for something long buried to rise. When I returned to my seat, I could feel the chill ripple across the room like a silent tide. A few guests fidgeted. Others sipped their wine too quickly. Reed was frozen beside Tasha, his jaw clenched so tightly I could almost hear his teeth grind. Tasha. She didn't blink. Her face stayed perfectly smooth, the mask holding firm, except for the corner of her mouth, which twitched ever so slightly. That crack would widen soon. The MC cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, thank you, Verena, for those powerful words. Someone started clapping. Polite. Shaky. It died within seconds. Reed stood abruptly and walked toward me. His steps were sharp, too quick. When he reached my table, he leaned in, his voice low and tight. What was that? I looked at him and said softly, Truth. You should try it. He blinked. You're making a scene. I shook my head. No, Reed, I'm making a memory. Before he could reply, a sudden sound cut through the room, crystal chiming against glass. Tasha. She stood now, holding her flute high, her expression sunny and unbothered, as if the last 10 minutes had never happened. That was her gift. She could pretend better than anyone. Well, that was memorable, she said with a warm laugh that didn't touch her eyes. But weddings are about joy, not tax records. Laughter rippled, hesitant and uneven. So let's raise a glass, she continued, lifting her champagne, to starting fresh, to letting go of the past and embracing the future, and to Verena, who looks absolutely stunning tonight. She glanced at me, her smile razor thin. Your glow is blinding. I didn't flinch. I simply tilted my head and met her gaze. She wasn't done. Before we move to the first dance, she added sweetly, I think it's only fair that Verena gets one more chance to say what she meant, maybe with a little less mystery? That was the cue, a challenge, veiled in civility. All eyes turned again. I rose, walked slowly to the center, took the mic once more. This time, no one handed it to me. I picked it up myself. I looked around the room, not at the couples or the photographers or the gossips, but at the people who had watched me for years and never once wondered what it cost to stand in the quiet shadows of Reed's success. I'll keep this brief, I began. No riddles, no metaphors. I turned toward Reed. I carried you through storms, through layoffs, through grief. I gave you everything, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I didn't build a company and raise a child separately. I did both at once, often with the same hands. I shifted my gaze to Tasha. And you could have been part of something real. But you came here to collect. You married, not for love, but for legacy. You underestimated silence. I reached into my purse. I have one more thing to give you. Gasps rose as I pulled out a folded paper. This, I said, holding it up, is the original trust document, the one that would have made you both wealthy beyond imagination. Signed, sealed, ready. I turned it slowly, showing the golden seal. And this, I reached in again, pulling out a second paper, is the notarized cancellation, filed yesterday. I set both on the nearby table. You can frame them, a before and after. The room was dead quiet. Then I looked at Reed. You told me once that I wouldn't get it, that Tasha had taste. You were right. She does. She acquired everything she could. Status, attention, leverage. I smiled. But not the one thing she truly needed. My belief. I let that settle. And Reed, I added, my voice lowering, you knew. Maybe not all of it, but enough. And you let it happen. Tasha's voice cracked through the air. That's not true. But I raised a hand. Don't interrupt. You've had your spotlight. I turned back to the crowd. For those of you wondering if I'm angry, don't worry, I'm not. I placed the microphone down, then I walked out. Not rushed, not flustered, just sure. Behind me, glasses trembled. Conversations restarted in whispers. Some guests followed with their eyes. Others looked away, unsure where to place their guilt. Reed didn't move. Tasha sat down slowly, hands shaking as she reached for her glass. And Mr. Takashi Ito, from his quiet corner, lifted his flute ever so slightly. Not in mockery, in recognition. I didn't walk far. Just outside the reception hall was a side corridor leading to the venue's private library, an ornate room barely used, with velvet chairs and a piano no one had played in years. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, and then I waited. Not for applause, not for anyone to chase after me. I waited because I knew what I had just done wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I heard footsteps. Reed entered first, alone. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie slightly loosened. He looked older in the low light, smaller. Less like the man they all toasted, and more like the boy I once held against my chest on nights he couldn't sleep. He didn't sit. He stood across from me, hands clenched into fists. You blindsided me, he said, voice tight. I protected myself, I replied. He shook his head. You humiliated us. No, I said gently. You did that. I simply pulled back the curtain. The door opened again. Tasha. Still in her gown, though the elegance had worn off, her eyes darted between us, her voice brittle. You think this little show is going to do anything? People will forget. They always do. You're just a bitter old woman trying to punish us for moving on. I didn't flinch. Instead, I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us. Would you like to hear what you said in the powder room? Tasha froze. Reed's head turned slowly toward her. I pressed play. Nina's voice came first, nervous, uncertain, then Tasha's, clear, sharp, cruel. The plan, the greed, the threat to institutionalize me. Every word echoed in that quiet room like a confession carved in stone. When it ended, the silence was so thick I could hear the faint hum of the air vent above us. Reed looked at her. You said that? She didn't answer. He stepped back, blinking like he'd just woken up from a long, strange dream. You were going to put her in a facility? Oh, come on, Reed, Tasha snapped, folding her arms. She's always been fragile, controlling. This is what she does, turns people against each other. I didn't put those words in your mouth, I said, voice low. And I didn't invent the call with Mason either. He went still, his mouth parted slightly. What? I met his eyes. I heard you. That day, in the lounge, you told him you'd get the money and leave her. Reed staggered back a step, color draining from his face. Tasha turned on him. Wait, what is she talking about? He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence was its own answer. Oh my God, she whispered. You were going to leave me. The room spiraled for them then. Rage, betrayal, deflection. I let it unfold, because for the first time, they had no script. No wonder you canceled it, Tasha hissed. You were never going to help us. You just wanted to control everything like always. I stood. I picked up the printed trust cancellation from the table, held it between 2 fingers, and let it drop to the floor. You both deserve each other, I said quietly, and that's not a compliment. Reed stepped forward. Mom, no, I said firmly. You don't get to call me that right now. He stopped. Tasha's composure cracked at last. "You know what? You're going to die alone. With all your money and your bitterness, no one's going to remember you." I looked at her calmly. "I don't need to be remembered. I just need to stop forgetting myself." With that, I walked out, back through the empty hall, past the flickering candles and scattered petals. A few guests lingered in the shadows, whispering. Some didn't meet my eyes. A few gave small nods. I returned to the front where the valet waited. As he fetched my car, I glanced behind one last time. Through the tall glass windows, I saw them. Reed, standing still. Tasha, sitting, her head in her hands, and between them, on the floor of that perfect venue, lay the remains of their plan, words caught on tape, a canceled fortune, and the look on their faces when the story turned without their permission. The car arrived. As I stepped in, someone tapped the window lightly. Mr. Takashi Ito. He bowed again, then handed the driver a small envelope and gestured for him to give it to me. When I opened it later that night at home, I found a simple note. "In the silence, you spoke the loudest. Thank you for reminding me what dignity looks like." I set it beside my bedside lamp and let the words settle. Not praise, but recognition. And sometimes, that's all a woman needs. I didn't look back. The car rolled away from the venue in silence. No headlights chasing us, no one calling out my name. Just the faint echo of glasses still clinking behind closed doors and the rustle of a dress I would never wear again. The navy blue fabric pooled around me like quiet armor. The wig still rested on my head, perfectly styled, but I didn't feel like I was hiding anymore. I felt finished. At the red light, I leaned my head against the window. The glass was cool. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars, laughter from a bar down the street, the soft glow of a street lamp flickering at the corner. Everything ordinary, comforting even. But inside me, something was shifting, something slow and steady and long overdue. We stopped at a quiet intersection. A couple crossed in front of the car, arm in arm, young and laughing like they'd never been burned. I watched them pass and wondered if I'd ever laughed like that, if I ever would again. When I arrived home, the house was dark except for the porch light. Alana had left it on. She always did, even when I told her not to fuss. I stepped out, heels tapping softly against the stone path, and breathed in the scent of lavender from the front garden. Inside, the air was still. No celebration, no music, just the soft creak of the old wood floors under my steps. I set the wig gently on its stand in the bedroom. My scalp felt cold again, but not vulnerable, just real. I ran my fingers through the thin, prickly regrowth at my crown. It would take time, but it was mine. In the mirror, I saw the faint outline of someone I had forgotten. Shoulders square, chin lifted, no apology in the lines of her face. I turned off the lamp and slept. The next morning, I woke before the sun again, not out of habit, but because my body was ready. It was strange to feel that readiness instead of dread. I padded into the kitchen, barefoot, and brewed my tea. The house hummed faintly around me, old pipes, a clicking fridge, a bird tapping at the window. As I poured the water, I heard a knock at the front door. 3 short taps, then silence. I paused, set the kettle down, walked slowly through the hallway and opened the door. It was Reed, hair disheveled, tie missing, the jacket from last night still in his hand. He looked like a child who'd wandered too far and just realized no one was following. "Can I come in?" he asked. I didn't move. He swallowed. "Please." I stepped aside. He entered quietly, looking around like he didn't recognize the place. The same house he grew up in, where he built blanket forts in the living room and spilled juice on the rug I never replaced. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said. I said nothing. "I didn't know what she said about you. The note, the hair, I didn't know she went that far." I nodded slowly. "But you knew enough." He looked down. "I did." I waited. He looked up, eyes wet. "There's nothing left, is there?" I walked to the kitchen table, opened the drawer, and took out a small, faded envelope. I handed it to him. He opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single page, lined paper, crayon scribbles. "To Mom, you are the smartest and strongest lady. When I'm big, I want to be just like you." He read it once, then again, then folded it slowly. "I wrote this when I was 6, he said, his voice breaking. "I know." He looked at me, as if searching for something. "I don't want your money." "I know," I repeated. He held the letter to his chest. Do you think there's anything left of that boy?" I didn't answer. Some questions aren't for mothers to solve. Instead, I said, "Use that letter to remember who you were, not who you became." He nodded. Tears spilled, but I didn't wipe them. They weren't mine to hold anymore. I walked him to the door. He hesitated on the threshold as if waiting for permission, but I didn't offer any. He stepped out into the morning light. I closed the door behind him. Then I locked it, not out of anger, but out of peace. Because some doors aren't meant to stay open, not even for the ones we love. 3 days after the wedding, Reed's company issued a formal statement. Due to internal restructuring and personal matters, Reed Halliday has voluntarily stepped down from his role as regional director, effective immediately. I read it on my phone over breakfast. No warning, no message from him. Just a crisp, curated announcement that masked the chaos behind it. They always package failure in polite language. That same morning, a mutual friend forwarded me a link to a forum thread. It was already buzzing. Photos from the wedding, snippets of my speech, commentary on the mother's mysterious mic drop, and rumors swirling about a massive inheritance pulled at the last second. None of it came from me, but truth has a way of leaking through cracks. I didn't reply. I didn't confirm or deny. Let them wonder. Within a week, Tasha's brand sponsorships began pulling out. Quietly, but quickly. One by one. The wellness teas, skincare brands, and fashion boutiques she'd carefully curated across her grid issued vague statements about no longer aligning with the influencer's values. Apparently, authenticity sells better than perfection. By the second week, their home was listed, a modern 3-bedroom tucked in a gated neighborhood. I recognized the furniture in the photos. They were mine, gifts over the years. A lamp from my first design trip to Florence. A hand-woven rug, Reed once said, reminded him of childhood, summers at the lake house. Now all up for grabs. The listing agent? Vince Calder. I knew him. He used to be Robert's fishing buddy. He called to ask if I wanted to retrieve any personal items left behind. I told him to donate them. Everything. The following month, I learned Tasha had moved in with a friend on the east side. Reed was renting a 2-bedroom near his old office. The walls still bare. Mason, I heard, had quietly accepted a position overseas, somewhere in Amsterdam. No farewell party, no goodbye post. Just gone. I'd like to say I felt triumphant, but the truth is, I felt quiet. Like walking through a house after a storm. The roof's still there. The walls are standing. But you notice what's missing more than what remains. Gary visited once just to check in. "You know," he said, sipping his usual bitter coffee, "I've never seen someone exit so cleanly. No lawsuits, no counters, just silence." "That's the beauty of silence," I replied. "It gives them nothing to push against." He chuckled. "The recording helped too." "It wasn't for court," I said. "It was for memory. I needed to know I wasn't imagining it." He studied me for a moment. "And now?" "Now I remember everything with my eyes open." Alana returned from her short trip around that time. She'd gone to visit her sister in Oregon, bringing back homemade jam and stories about hummingbirds on the porch. She stepped inside, set her bag down, and looked at me with that knowing gaze. "You good?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm better than I've been in years." She smiled. "They don't make women like you anymore." They tried, I said, but I kept the blueprint. We laughed, and it wasn't forced. That night, I walked out to the garden alone. The lavender had started to wilt, but the rosemary was thriving. I knelt down, brushing my fingers through its woody stems, inhaling the sharp, grounding scent. Above me, stars blinked awake. I thought about Reed and how he used to point out constellations from the roof when he was 10, how he believed every star was someone watching over us. I wondered if he still believed that, or if the world had taught him not to. I didn't pity him, but I mourned what we lost. Not the money, not the wedding, but the version of us that once existed before the rot set in, before the quiet betrayals, before ambition turned into justification. The next morning, I opened my journal. I hadn't written in weeks, not since the letter I gave him, but that morning, the words came freely. You can love someone and still let them go. You can give everything and still walk away with nothing, and still feel whole. I closed the book gently and set it on the table beside my tea. Outside, a bird landed on the railing. Small, plain, unremarkable. But it sang like the world was brand new. The notary's office was tucked between a flower shop and a modest insurance agency. Nothing grand. No gold plaques or leather chairs. Just linoleum floors, faded motivational posters, and the smell of old carpet and fresh toner. Gary met me outside. "You sure about this?" he asked as we walked in. I didn't hesitate. I was never more sure about anything. He smiled, nodded, and held the door open. Inside, the clerk recognized us immediately. I had been in this building years ago to sign the first draft of my living trust, back when I believed in neat legacies and bloodlines as destiny, back when I thought giving was the same as loving. Not anymore. We sat down at a rectangular table under flickering fluorescent light. The new will was already printed and waiting. No beneficiaries from the Halliday bloodline. No allowances. No room for reinterpretation. Just names. 5 of them. 5 nonprofit organizations, each dedicated to helping women recover from financial abuse, navigate divorce safely, rebuild their lives after widowhood, or escape households where they were erased. Gary read each clause aloud. My assets, liquid and non-liquid, would be split evenly across the 5 foundations. The real estate holdings I kept under my name sold, and the proceeds transferred directly to programs funding small business loans for single mothers over 40. The art collection, donated to women's shelters with creative therapy programs. The vehicles, auctioned. Proceeds to trauma-informed legal aid. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about redirection. I want every cent to move forward, I said, signing each page, not backward. The final signature came with a long exhale. The notary slid the documents into a binder and stamped them, one after the other with deliberate finality. Gary leaned back. "You just rewrote your legacy." "No," I said quietly. "I finally wrote the right one." After we finished, he handed me a small envelope. "Your personal copy, sealed. No one can contest it." "Let them try," I said, only half joking. As we walked outside, a breeze tugged gently at my coat. I looked across the street. The florist's window was full of tulips, bright, loud, unapologetic. I bought a bouquet. Back home, I set them in a ceramic vase I made in one of the community art classes I'd started attending. My hands still clumsy with clay, but less hesitant than they used to be. Later that week, I wrote 5 letters, one to each of the organizations, personal, handwritten, no staff to do it for me, no assistants, just my voice on paper. I told them what the gift meant. I told them what it had once been meant for, and why I changed my mind. I told them that this wasn't charity, it was reclamation, each envelope sealed with wax, each name spelled out slowly with care. That night, I sat by the fireplace. No wine, just water and the soft crackle of wood. I stared into the flame and felt something rise in my chest. Not sadness, not triumph, just space. like an attic you'd finally cleared out, no longer haunted by what you were saving just in case. The next morning, I called Dr. Erin Locke. She hadn't heard from me since before the wedding. "I thought I might hear from you," she said, her voice warm. "I'm ready for something different," I told her. "Like what?" I paused. "Like peace. Not the passive kind, the active kind, the one you earn." She said nothing for a moment. Then, "Sounds like you've already started." We scheduled a time for next week, not out of crisis, but intention. That evening, Alana knocked gently on my bedroom door. "They're talking about you again," she said, leaning against the frame. "Who?" "The internet, the guests, the city." I raised an eyebrow. "Good or bad?" "Both, which means you probably did something right." I chuckled. "Let them talk." She stepped in, holding a cup of tea. "You really gave it all away?" "Every cent." Her eyes twinkled. "And yet somehow you look wealthier than I've ever seen you." I smiled. "Turns out," I said, taking the cup, "freedom has a very high net worth." We sat in quiet companionship as the sky darkened outside. No documents left to sign, no speeches left to give. Just a woman, her house, and the silence she chose for herself. It was a Thursday when he showed up, late afternoon, just as the sun stretched long shadows across the garden. I was pruning rosemary by the kitchen window when I saw him step out of a cab, no car of his own anymore, and pause at the gate. He didn't ring the bell. He just stood there staring at the house like it had grown teeth. I kept cutting. A minute later, the bell chimed. Not urgent, just there. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. Reed stood on the porch, thinner than before, hair longer, eyes tired in a way that couldn't be fixed by rest. He held nothing, not even his phone. "Hi," he said. I didn't speak. He swallowed. "Can I come in?" I looked at him for a long moment. Then I opened the door wider and stepped aside. He walked in slowly, as if the walls might remember too much. We sat in the living room. He took the armchair where Robert used to read the newspaper every Sunday. I stayed on the edge of the couch, posture straight. He glanced around. "It's quieter than I remember." "Things tend to be, when there's no pretending left." He nodded once, then leaned forward, elbows on knees, head bowed. I wanted to talk, not to argue, not to explain, just to say what I should have said earlier. I waited. He looked up at me, and his voice came smaller than I expected. I was wrong. He didn't embellish it, didn't pad it with reasons or circumstances, just, I was wrong. I exhaled slowly. "I know." He pressed his lips together, then continued. "I thought I could separate things. You, her, Mason, the money. I told myself it was complicated, that you wouldn't understand. But the truth is, I didn't want to face what I'd become." A pause. "I told myself I was protecting you by staying silent. But really, I was protecting myself." I said nothing. Not because I didn't care, but because I needed him to keep going. He did. "When I saw your face during the toast, something broke. Not because you canceled the money. I honestly didn't even care by then. It was because you looked at me like I was a stranger." "You were," I said. He nodded. "I know." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the letter I had given him, the one he wrote to me at 6 years old in crayon. "I've read this every night since," he said, "and every time I feel like I'm reading something someone else wrote, a better version of me, one I lost somewhere between ambition and fear." I stared at the letter. The creases were deeper now, the paper more worn. "I thought about writing you a new one," he said. "Something adult, measured. But I realized you didn't need that." He stood and handed me the envelope again. "I don't expect anything, Mom. Not forgiveness, not connection. I just wanted you to know. I remember who I used to be, and I'm going to try to find my way back." His voice broke. And if I ever do, I hope I get to introduce that version of me to you, even if you never let me back into your life. I looked down at the letter, at the shaky handwriting, the backward S in strongest. When I looked back up, I saw not a child, not a villain, not a victim, but a man finally stripped of the masks he'd spent years crafting. "There's nothing left," he said again. "Is there?" I took a long breath. Then I said calmly, "I gave you my life." His face crumpled, but I held steady. "That was everything." He blinked hard, trying to hold himself together. I stood and walked him to the door. Before he stepped out, he turned. "I loved you, you know." "I know," I said. "But love isn't what you feel. It's what you protect." He nodded. A single broken gesture. Then he stepped into the light. I closed the door behind him slowly, and this time I didn't lock it out of defense. I locked it to honor what had just passed through it. Grief, truth, and the beginning of something new, not reconciliation, but release. I moved into the lake house 3 weeks later. It wasn't a dramatic move. No boxes piled high, no emotional goodbye to the city. Just a quiet shift, a slow collection of the things I wanted to carry forward. My mother's brooch, 3 books I never finished, a chipped mug from college, and a photograph of me and Reed at the zoo when he was 7. He had peanut butter on his cheek, and I looked impossibly young. The rest I left behind. The lake house had once belonged to Robert's aunt, a quiet woman who painted wildflowers and fed birds by hand. After she passed, it sat empty for years. I had nearly sold it twice, but something stopped me each time. Maybe some part of me always knew I'd need a place like this one day. The first morning I woke there, I made tea and sat on the back porch. The fog rolled off the lake in long ribbons, silver and slow, and the sun cracked gently across the horizon like an opening note. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and just breathed. No meetings, no guest lists, no secrets walking on high heels, just the sound of water lapping against the rocks and the rustle of pine needles overhead. Later that week, I signed up for 2 classes, pottery on Mondays, watercolor on Thursdays. They were held at the local community center, taught by women who wore mismatched socks and laughed easily. No one there asked my last name. No one cared. At first, my bowls wobbled. My watercolor bled into the edges. But that didn't matter. I wasn't there to master anything. I was there to remember what it felt like to create without being evaluated. There were other women in the classes too, older, quieter, with stories folded deep into their posture. Some had lost husbands, some had been left. A few had built empires and walked away from them without applause. We didn't trade pain, we just shared space. One afternoon, I asked to join their morning walk group. We didn't talk much, just moved together through the foggy trails, sometimes in silence, sometimes in laughter that came out of nowhere and stayed too long. It felt like sisterhood, one I hadn't known I'd been missing. One morning, while pruning lavender by the front steps, I heard a little voice behind me. "Excuse me," it said. I turned. A small girl, maybe 9, stood there holding a stack of books in her arms. Her hair was tangled, her knees scraped. "My grandma said you used to be important." I blinked, then smiled. "Did she?" She nodded. "She said you had a building named after you once." I chuckled softly. "I did." She looked at me, squinting into the morning sun. "Are you still important?" I thought about it. Then I knelt beside her. "Being important's not always about buildings," I said. "Sometimes it's about what you build inside yourself." She tilted her head. "Like muscles?" "Kind of, but quieter." She nodded slowly as if she understood more than I expected. "I like your hair," she said suddenly. "It's shiny." I reached up, touched the crown of my head. No wig, not anymore. The silver was coming in soft now, patches of white, gentle waves returning. I didn't brush it. I didn't dye it. I let it do what it needed to do. I smiled at the girl. Thank you. She handed me a drawing, a crayon sketch of a woman in a dress standing by a lake, arms wide open. It's you, she said proudly. You look happy. I looked at the drawing for a long time. I think I am. That evening, as I journaled by candlelight, I received an email from a local community college. The subject line read, TEDx Invitation, Women Who Rewrote the Ending. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam. But then I opened it. They wanted me to speak, not about money, not about real estate, but about what it means to walk away with empty hands and a full spine. The topic was already suggested. Your last act can be your first. I didn't respond right away. I let the offer sit like tea, steeping. Later that night, I wrote one sentence in my journal. Maybe healing isn't a chapter. Maybe it's the whole book. The moon rose silver over the lake, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't in someone else's story anymore. I was writing my own, and every word felt earned. The morning I knew I had come back to myself, it didn't arrive with any fanfare. No lightning bolt, no tearful revelation, just quiet. I padded across the wooden floors barefoot, the kettle hissing on the stove, and paused by the mirror near the front door. For weeks, I had passed it without stopping. I no longer checked my reflection the way I used to. The need to assess, to adjust, to appear, had slowly loosened its grip. But that morning, I stopped. I looked. Not glanced, looked. And what I saw made me smile. My hair had begun to grow back, not in the thick chestnut strands I once had, but in soft silver tufts, gentle and unbothered. A slow reclaiming, not of youth, but of ownership. There was no shame left in that mirror, just someone who had endured, unraveled, and still stood. The wig sat untouched on the dresser. I hadn't worn it in over 2 weeks. One afternoon, I had simply taken it off and never reached for it again. Alana, during one of her weekend visits, had folded it carefully and placed it in a silk-lined box. You'll want to keep it, she said gently. Not to wear, just to remember. I did. Not as a relic of shame, but as proof of what I had survived. That morning, after tea, I sat down with pen and paper. Not a laptop, not a digital screen, just ink and breath and space. I wrote a letter. Not to read, not to Tasha, not even to myself, but to the woman I had become. You didn't disappear. You were simply waiting for your voice to come back, not loud but certain, waiting for your skin to feel like yours again, waiting for the mirror to stop being a battlefield. You are not fragile. You are forged. And this face with its lines and softness and steel, is the face of someone who took her life back, one strand at a time. I folded the letter and placed it inside the journal. There was a knock at the door. A courier stood outside holding a thin envelope marked with calligraphy and a foreign stamp. Japan. I thanked him, closed the door, and opened the envelope with steady hands. Inside was a letter from Mr. Takashi Ito. His handwriting was precise, formal. Dear Mrs. Halliday, in our world, dignity is often mistaken for silence. But what you showed that night was not quietness. It was precision, grace with weight, truth without violence. You reminded me that there is a different kind of power, one that does not shout but holds, one that does not demand but chooses. Thank you for reminding me what dignity looks like, and for proving it can wear navy blue, stand alone, and still command a room. With respect and quiet admiration, Takashi Ito. I held the letter for a long time, and then I placed it next to the child's drawing, the one the little girl had given me on the porch. Both letters, one from a man continents away and one from a child with scraped knees, said the same thing. You matter, not because of your wealth, not because of your role, but because you stood up. Later that evening, I took a walk by the lake. The wind curled gently across the water, and a heron lifted from the reeds in a slow, graceful arc. I watched it go, wondering how something so heavy could look so light. Back home, I lit a single candle and stood by the mirror again. No makeup, no wig, no armor, just me. My reflection looked back without apology. I ran a hand across the crown of my head and smiled, not because I was proud, but because I was whole. And that was enough. The tea cooled beside me, forgotten. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying no judgment, only breath. And in that stillness, I saw her, the woman who had been waiting. Not the mother, not the widow, not the heiress, just Verena, alive, free, and finally, home.